Welcome, everyone. I'm Lee Meriwether, and with me is Todd Orston. Todd and I are partners at the law firm of Meriwether and Tharp, and you're listening to Meriwether and Tharp Radio on the new Talk 106.7. Here you'll learn about divorce, family law, tips on how to save your marriage if it's in the middle of a crisis, and from time to time, even tips on how to take your marriage to the next level. If you want to read more about us, you can always check us out online at AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. I got a question for you today, Todd.
I can't wait.
All right. Have you ever heard of a divorce where someone could be happy with receiving just 1% of the marital estate?
And does that person have some mental deficiency or some 1%?
1%.
In all my years, I don't think I have had a client who would be happy with 1% of the marital estate.
I have one word, one name. Bezos.
Bezos. Yeah, what would that 1% amount to?
So, as people may have heard, he's getting a divorce, and his estate is worth an estimated $137 billion.
How do you live? How do you survive?
She would receive $1.37 billion if she only got 1%. That's more than winning the lottery.
And I may not know much about divorce, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say she's probably asking for more than 1%.
I would think so.
All right.
And if she got 50%, she would be the wealthiest woman in the world. It's hard to imagine.
Seriously, I don't even know how I can continue with the show. I'm going to spend the entire show just daydreaming.
But what you would do with just $1 billion?
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well,
so why do we bring this up, though?
Because we're going to break down this divorce. You know, it's not that I want anybody to divorce. So, but put that aside for a moment. Their divorce is extremely fascinating because it's so complex. There are so many different layers to the divorce that we want to talk about. And we're assuming this divorce is amicable because when they both came out on social media, they said that the plan is to be fair and amicable, fair to each other and to their kids. And so,
but that doesn't change it from a complex, incredibly complex case to a non-complex case. It doesn't make it simple just because they're amicable,
right?
Which is what we want for anyone and everyone going through a divorce. Doesn't mean that it's going to simplify the issues that need to be resolved in order to obtain that divorce.
Yeah, and I could easily see, and we're going to break down how it came up to this number, but I could easily see this divorce, even if they're both saying, hey, you know what, we want to do what's fair, still costing $1 million in legal fees and other costs.
Which to normal mortals, that is crazy talk. That is insane. How could you spend that kind of money? We are attorneys. We have handled cases where the clients were worth millions and they have not spent nearly $1 million, but still they've spent a lot of money. And even we are like, that is crazy, $1 million in fees. But when you think about it, first of all, how much? I mean, $1 million is what percentage of the total value?
And I may be off on a zero or two here, but it's something like 0.00004% of the entire marital estate.
And anyone checking math, let's just assume that's not right. Okay, you don't have to write in and say you missed 8 zeros or whatever. But
it's a tiny fraction.
It's a tiny fraction. And what we're going to talk about, jokes aside, is when we talk about, a lot of fees in a case that really should be amicable, because of the complexity, they're going to need to do a lot of things that in a lot of normal divorces, you're not going to have to do.
Right.
Property valuations, business valuations, there's going to have to be a lot of things, tax consequences that have to be taken into account. There are numerous companies that would have to be evaluated. So all of these things are going to require experts to step in. Mm-hmm. Both of them may need their own experts, and that's going to cost a lot of money. But to be honest, I don't know how you avoid that.
Yeah, so we're going to break that. Let's narrow this down. And there's 4 core areas of just most divorce cases, there's child custody, child support, alimony, and equitable division, division of property, because this case is I understand is going to be in the state of Washington. And we're going to actually talk about the standard at which they break up or divide up a marital estate. So let's eliminate child custody. With that kind of wealth, I hear two good parents. They're both on the same page. I seriously doubt there's going to be very much money spent on custody. The two of them are going to work out something together. Gosh, they have so much money. They probably have multiple nannies to deal with, transfer the children back and forth. I really don't see that as an issue, and maybe a few $1,000 just because of the nature of what they do. The parenting plan should not be difficult. Let's put that aside. When let's say both parties walked away with 50%, there's not really a need for alimony. If you have $43 billion and the two of you are the most, some of the wealthiest people in the world, there's no need for alimony.
Yeah, because alimony is need-based, meaning the party who's asking for it has to say that without the financial assistance of the other party, I won't be able to make ends meet, right? Yeah. I won't be able to live whatever my lifestyle was that I enjoyed, or there are numerous arguments that you can make and different arguments in different jurisdictions that can be made, but you have to show a need at the most basic level. When you are going to be receiving more than likely billions of dollars, it's very hard to say, well, I need to buy a space shuttle and a cruise liner.
Well, actually, that could be addressed when we get to one of the companies, Blue Origin.
That's right. So she's not going to be able to prove that she has a need.
Right. All right. So let's take that off the board. Now what we have left is child support. That's really kind of interesting because the law requires that child support, at least here in Georgia. I have not looked at Washington's law on child support, but most of them are very similar as far as there's got to be a child support payment. I would imagine the two of them just going to come up because neither of them really need. If you have billions of dollars, you don't really need child support.
And child support in Georgia, there's a formula, and it doesn't matter. At a certain point, it sort of caps out. All right, yeah. But nonetheless, it doesn't matter what number you throw in there. Basically, the children and their needs are going to be met. And basically, they're not going to have to even break a sweat thinking about whatever money is transferred in the form of child support. Right. So let's say he does pay child support, whether he pays $1,000 a month or $50,000 a month, it's not even worth him worrying about it because that's taking up more effort than it. Yeah. He's making so much on interest on his investments that but the bottom line is there will be some amount of child support ordered, and pursuant to the law in that state, it just depends.
I don't see that really as being a big fight.
It should not be a big fight.
Now we've seen cases, and we talked about on the radio a case where somebody wanted their child support to go up from $20,000 a month, $50,000 a month. But that person really didn't have very much money.
Yeah, I mean, that was a lot of those situations were different because, or at least some of them were different because the other party, let's say they were never married, right? Yeah. So, or in that case, they were married, but the other party, Brittany, made so much more money.
Yeah,
and K-Fed, was asking for a ridiculous amount that, if you ask me, my opinion in that show was. It goes so far beyond what is necessary to take care of a child.
So that's probably not going to be. So now we've boiled it. That child support's not going to be an issue. So now we've boiled it down to the division of the assets. Now, Washington's considered a community property state. Now, so a lot of people, when they hear that term, they think, that means everything's 50-50. But when you read the statute, that's actually not what it says. The statute says that the court can divide the marital assets in a just and equitable fashion, and this is not a direct quote, but I'm pulling from it, in a just and equitable fashion after considering the nature and extent of the community property, so that's the marital, what we call marital property, they call community property, the nature and the extent of the separate property, that which you had before the divorce or perhaps an inheritance, the duration of the marriage, So, and everything in this case, they pretty much accumulated during the marriage. And then the economic circumstances of each spouse. So, I mean, I suppose he could try to argue, well, Judge, if you just give her 1%, she's still going to be worth $1.37 billion. But the court would look at, I would imagine, she actually contributed a lot to this from what I understand. I mean, obviously, we're not the lawyers on the case, just did a little bit of research. And she, when she's a smart woman on her by herself. I mean, she's an award-winning novelist. She worked at the New York hedge fund with him. That's where she met him, and she helped start Amazon. She actually worked in the accounting department when it started. So, and gosh, she has a bunch more. We're going to get into the other things that she's involved with as well as along with how do you go about dividing up such a large estate. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lee Meriwether, and with me is Todd Orston. Todd and I are partners at the law firm of Meriwether and Tharp, and you're listening to Meriwether and Tharp Radio on the new Talk 106.7. If you want to read more about us, you can always check us out online at AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. And today we are talking about a very fascinating, complicated divorce. At least that's what it appears. It is the Bezos divorce. They announced recently that they are getting a divorce, and we have, in the last segment, kind of broke down that we really didn't see the big costs coming out of 3 of the 4 core areas of family law. We didn't really see a problem with child support, alimony, or custody. That's something that they'll probably be able to work out fairly quick. It is the division of their assets and liabilities they accumulate during the marriage that makes it so interesting. And we're going to explain why it's so complicated, why it's so costly in the next few segments. So let's start with what we, obviously we're not the lawyers, so we don't know his entire marital estate. Just from what's out there in the media, obviously he is the largest single shareholder of Amazon. He owns 16.
I'm sorry, what is that? I've heard of it, but yeah.
Largest single shareholder of Amazon at 16.3%. We'll talk a little bit about why that actually really complicates the divorce. And that is probably the largest, not probably, I think it is the largest single asset in their marriage. But they have so many other things. He owns a company called, we'll talk about this too in a minute, but Blue Origin. And that has the potential of being worth even more than Amazon one day. We've got a lot of real estate, we understand. They own hundreds of acres. And I believe he bought the Washington Post, which has a value of something like $250 million, just that asset alone. And I'm sure there's other assets they've got we just don't know about.
So, I mean, when you look at any kind of a divorce action, one of the first things that we deal with when dealing with division of property, identify the types of assets. Mm-hmm. So you've already talked about a lot of it. We're going to be looking at bank accounts. I'm sure they have them, savings accounts. There might be some trusts that have been created. We're going to have to deal with those. 529, some kind of education accounts, although when they have that kind of money, maybe they haven't done it because they don't need any tax, benefits there. But
they'll just sell some stock.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Investment accounts, that might get a little more complex, but then we have to deal with the division of real property, meaning real estate, and businesses, not business, but businesses. And we're not talking about a mom and pop hardware store.
Right.
We're talking about Amazon, which has basically changed the world in terms of the service that it provides. And so we're not talking about $1,000 business, even $1 million business. We are talking about a multi-billion-dollar business.
Did it break $1 trillion value? I can't remember.
I'm not sure, but
I heard them say it broke the cap of Apple.
Yeah. So the bottom line is we are talking about assets that are so valuable. All right, and it's not as simple as saying, okay, well, there's a house and there's a lake house. All right, one of you, it's easy. The value here is this and that. It has a different value. All right, you take the house, I'll take the lake house.
So let's do some quick math just to give people an idea, just like how let's talk about real estate. And I understand they own hundreds of acres of real estate across the country. Could have heard that wrong, but that's my understanding. So let's say, for just hypothetical sake, they've owned 100 different pieces of property. Okay, if you were to go and value, and so if they say, well, we want this to be fair, but we're really not sure what all these pieces of property are worth today. We bought some of them years ago. Well, to be fair, you'd have somebody go out and appraise them. Well, let's just say the appraisals were $500 a piece,
which up there could be more. Could be $1,000 a piece.
Right. If it's commercial, it could be $5,000.
Yeah, that's right.
But let's say it was 500. So 500 times 100, you're now at $50,000.
And that's before any negotiations have taken place.
Right.
That's just to get to a point where you have the information necessary, meaning the values, that you can start negotiating. Oh, and by the way, both parties have the right to have their own evaluations done.
Right.
So there are cases where parties are trying to be amicable and they're trying to work together, and they say, okay, for purposes of our negotiations, let's agree to hire one person, one appraiser, to do the valuation, and we'll both agree to accept the values. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't always happen.
Right.
So, because sometimes if you anticipate a difference of opinion, a wife might say, I want my own valuator to go in, value the property, because if I have to go to court, I want that person to be my expert to talk about what the value is. And the husband says, well, I want my person to be my expert if we have to go to court. So now what was $50,000 might be $100,000.
And it could, if it was $150,000, it'd just double it.
That's right. So you could be $100,000 to $200,000+ just in valuation expense. And again, that doesn't mean you now have it divided. It's you just are now at a point where you can have an educated conversation about division of those assets, because you can say, okay, well, how about we agree that property is worth $200,000 and this one over here is worth $1 million. And now you can start to divide the estate, and you can say, okay, if it's going to be a 50-50, at least of that property, I'll get these properties, you get these properties, and that comes out to 50-50.
Right. And we know that in this state, while it doesn't say equitable like it says here in Georgia, when you read the definition of the division of community property, it says just and equitable. The court will divide it in a just and equitable fashion. So, we just figuring out the value of all those pieces of property can easily cost them tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars by there. And then let's say you need to change the title on all those. Well, now you have to add in the lawyer's fees just to change the titles, and that you could be spending a few $100 on each property. Especially if you're going to change the name, that's all 100 properties. Going back to our hypothetical. So if your fees are, I don't know, they could be $500 again. So now you're at $50,000 on the low end for appraisals and $50,000 to change the title. And that's assuming there's no filing fees. And
that's also assuming that there's not mortgages. Now, granted, people, but for tax reasons, they may say, you know what, it's better to borrow someone's money and pay a low interest rate, and I can make more money from my investments than I'm paying it. So I've seen people actually. I would be surprised. But the point is, there are a whole number of other issues that might have to be resolved. That it's not. That's not going to stop them from negotiating and settling, but it has to be dealt with.
Then there's another analysis to be done on this. Gosh, we haven't even gotten to Amazon yet. We're still on the real estate. So the other analysis is, since these aren't your private residence, there's going to be capital gain treatments when you go to sell it. So if you're trying to be fair, maybe you bought this piece of property at $200,000 and now it's worth $1 million. But when you include capital gain treatment, well, you're not getting, if you go to sell it, you're not going to get $800,000 because you got to pay, I think it's 20%, maybe a little bit more than 20% because of his bracket. I know that I'm not up on the recent changes in capital gains laws. That's why. So if you were a divorce lawyer, you'd have to bring in a tax lawyer and a CPA.
Right. And that goes back to where some of these, because remember, that's what we're talking about.
Growing.
How the expenses grow, it's because there are experts that you're going to need to pull in. I can guarantee you that there is probably a small army of tax professionals
Right.
who are going to be
Who are already
involved.
helping him.
Yeah, that are already that are going to be involved in the divorce process to figure out and make sure that any of the steps that they take to divide the estate don't basically bite them. Now, granted, biting them, they're going to survive no matter what financially, but aren't going to come back and bite them in terms of taxes.
But they may be trying to get creative. So
that's right.
Because, and we're going to talk about up next, we're going to talk about Amazon and how that complicates things. So they may get creative, and let's say hypothetically, they're able to carve out the majority of the real estate and give it to, I think it's MacKenzie is her name, give it to her in exchange for him keeping a larger share of Amazon to avoid problems that we're going to talk about in a little bit. So you need to do those evaluations to keep it fair. And so it's not that the lawyers are expensive or, gosh, $1 million, that sounds like a lot. But when you start breaking it down to all these analyses that need to occur to follow their instructions, we want it to be a fair and equitable split.
Yep.
Boy, you can get to $1 million quickly.
And also, it reopens a conversation about alimony, because I can tell you right now that if he walks away with a company that is paying him a whole bunch of money and she takes other assets that aren't income-producing assets, she might make a claim for alimony that is basically like, well, hold on one second. You have a company that's paying you millions probably, or whatever it is he's being paid.
I think his salary is actually really low, but he gets paid stock.
Right, exactly. That she might say, I'm going to need alimony so that I can live a certain lifestyle and not have to immediately start dipping into the estate assets that I get in the property division.
Yeah, so there could be a situation where she takes a lower percentage of the marital estate in exchange for him paying her alimony
over a period of time.
Yeah, so it's not that alimony's been eliminated, but if you're trying to be creative, that's an option. And up next, we're going to talk about how Jeff's ownership interest in Amazon, it also complicates this divorce. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lee Meriwether, and with me is Todd Orston. Todd and I are partners at the law firm of Meriwether and Tharp, and you're listening to Meriwether and Tharp Radio on the new Talk 106.7. If you want to read more about us, you can always check us out online at AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. Well, today we have been talking about Bezos.
When you say it that way, it sounds ominous.
It does.
Bezos.
No, we're talking about Jeff Bezos, the current CEO of Amazon and the largest single shareholder of Amazon. Well, he and his wife announced a couple weeks ago that they are going to get a divorce. So we are breaking down how this divorce would be pretty expensive, even with the parties saying, hey, we want this to be fair. And so it's such an interesting case. I mean, you don't see billionaires get divorced that often, and when they do, it just the analysis of it from a lawyer standpoint becomes fascinating. A lot of times people are very interested in, gosh, how do you split up something like this?
Yeah, the majority of divorce cases, the attorney can handle it and doesn't usually need to hire any experts to help.
Yeah.
This is a case where not only are experts going to need to be retained to assist, but it could be a literal army of experts when it comes to real property, meaning real estate valuations, when it comes to business valuations, when it comes to tax analysis. The amount of assistance that they will need to make sure that they, first of all, are structuring a fair agreement.
Yeah.
And two, they're structuring an agreement that doesn't have any hidden consequences to either party, tax or other consequences.
And then there'll be costs in executing the agreement.
Absolutely.
So, all right, well, let's talk about Amazon, because this is really interesting, because when you have a publicly traded company, things change. So at one level, he's still the face of Amazon. So if there's bad behavior that comes out in the divorce, it can impact stock prices. People can get skittish and want to back out. That's probably one of the reasons why they announced it like they did and said it wants to be amicable. And I would imagine it is in MacKenzie's, I think that's how you pronounce her name, MacKenzie's best interest or Miss Bezos, to not say anything, even if there was bad behavior, because it would impact her value of the what she might get out of it.
She'd be cutting off her nose to spite her face. She'd be, oh, well, it's out there, it's public, he engaged in bad behavior, and now all of a sudden the value of the stock that she might get a portion of is lower.
And so, people might say, well, why doesn't he just give her 8% or his half of it'd just be over 8%, but give her 8% of his Amazon stock? Well, that creates a problem because the other shareholders may get worried about, well, what is her plan? She really hasn't been involved in the business in a long time. Where does she want to take the company? Is that going to create tension inside Amazon? And the shareholders might not like it. The shareholders may say, oh, well, and I'm guessing with a C corporation, that's what this is, you can get really flexible in stock. So perhaps he can create and this is where the extra costs would come in, lawyers' fees and creating new stocks, that perhaps he gives her 8% so she gets the value, but it's non-voting stock. So that is a potential possibility. But there was a case, Steve Wynn, the Wynn Hotels in Las Vegas. It's my understanding that when he went through a divorce, he did give his wife half his stock. Well, she used that stock to exert influence over the business to try to take it in the direction that she wanted to take it in, and it created a lot of tension inside the business. So what seemed like a good, easy idea all of a sudden created problems down the line, and while they were divorced from a standpoint of a marriage, they were still married inside the business, which creates
that always
problems.
Works out so well.
Yeah. So that's a complication. So people might say, okay, Todd, well, why doesn't he just sell 8% of his stock?
Well, again, that can have a huge impact. That could have a ripple effect. Him just giving up that much interest in the company can weaken his control over the company potentially.
Right.
And so, I mean, we are, I think, being foolish if we don't think that the fact that he is the largest single individual shareholder of a company like Amazon doesn't give him some strength, some power in that company, some influence in that company. And so by suddenly watering that down and lowering that level of interest he has in the company, it absolutely can have a ripple effect and can jeopardize his position there.
And, the other shareholders, they may have invested in Amazon because they believe in his vision, which is why the shareholders are, anyways, I won't get into corporate law, but the shareholders have a lot of influence on who's on the board and the board of directors, who can influence who's the CEO and all that stuff. But they may get worried like, oh, my gosh, he's just lost a portion of his interest. I don't know who the new shareholders are going to be because he's selling 8%. And people start selling their stock, and then the stock plummets. As a result, I mean, it's not going to plummet that much.
I think a lot would have to happen for Amazon stock to plummet.
It's going to drop, though.
But it can have an impact. And the bottom line is they don't want their personal life to impact something like Amazon.
Yeah.
Or Blue Horizon, or I mean, whatever business interest Origin, pardon me. So they don't want it to have that kind of an impact, and that's why these experts that we're talking about, and we use experts all the time, right? Not to this degree, not to this extent, but that's why they become so important, and that's why the costs go up.
And so you brought up a good point when we were talking about doing this show. As the CEO of a publicly traded company who receives stock options as part of his, or I don't know if he has stock that's part of his pay, what sort of limitations are there from a Security Exchange Commission, an SEC? They're the ones who control or supervise or monitor publicly traded companies. Are there limitations from that area of the law as to how much he can sell? Are there limitations under his contract as a CEO? Because a lot of times there's written agreements with the business where it says, even though he created the business, they may have made a written contract that says you can't sell more than X percent at any given time. So there may be some contractual limitations.
Well, that talk about a ripple effect. If all of a sudden you see the CEO dumping all of his stock in a company, now granted, again, we're talking about Amazon, but if this were a company other than Amazon, and you see the CEO dumping for whatever reason stock, confidence, investor confidence will probably hit an all-time low. With Amazon, it would probably open up a lot of opportunities for people to grab up as much as they can.
Right.
But still, the ripple effect is something that has to be taken into consideration, and that's why tax specialists and other financial experts are going to need and will end up coming in to make sure that they don't do something that can hurt them personally or hurt the companies they are invested in.
So in this case, really, the divorce lawyer almost becomes, the general contractor, they're not necessarily the lawyer making all the decisions. They're finding out, okay, I've got this piece of the estate. We need to have, how can we divide this? Oh, I need a securities lawyer to double check me here. I need a contract lawyer to read over his agreement. And what can we do and what can't we do? So they basically become the coordinator of this
almost
divorce.
like the conductor of an orchestra.
Yes,
they know what needs to be done. But the way that we practice is, do we understand, taxes and the impact of different decisions on that? What if you do something in a divorce that it can have a direct tax impact? Yes. And financial impacts? Yes. We know those things, but we are not experts.
Right.
And so if it gets too complex, we have no problem bringing in an expert. And there's multiple benefits. A, it helps us to make sure we do the right thing for our client and get the best deal for our client. But on top of that, it's an expert that if we have to go to court, we have an expert who can come into court and testify on behalf of our client, and that's good evidence for a judge. But, yes, it's like a conductor. They're going to understand all of these things.
Right.
But they're
bring it together.
Right. But they're going to say, let me I need to crunch some numbers, and I'm going to have these other experts come in and do the crunching.
Yeah. So, I suppose, here's another cost question. So let's say they can get creative and separate out 8% of his stock, but it's non-voting stock, so she gets the value of that, but she can't influence the business. Who should pay for that cost? Because that would cost money to create a new class of stock if it doesn't already exist. But I guess he'd also have to reclassify his stock. Is he responsible for that? Is that something the business would pay for, Amazon? So, and that's not something. I mean, I haven't done corporate law for a long time, so I don't know the answer to that. And neither of us are securities lawyers. So.
I think we would both be naive if we believe that what's going to happen is a simple split down the middle of the stock and interest in the companies, okay? Which means that if equitable to them is as close to 50-50 as possible, which it may not be, then that's where the experts come in.
And up next, we're going to talk about Blue Origin. Welcome, everyone. I'm Lee Meriwether, and with me is Todd Orston. Todd and I are partners at the law firm of Meriwether and Tharp, and you're listening to Meriwether and Tharp Radio on the new Talk 106.7. If you want to read more about us, you can always check us out online at AtlantaDivorceTeam.com. Well, today there was so much more we want to talk about, but we only have one segment left to talk about this Bezos divorce, the wealthiest, at least at the time of the recording this. He's the wealthiest man in the world, who owns he's the largest single shareholder of one of the largest companies in the world. And unfortunately, he's getting a divorce. And so we're talking about the complexities, actually, we're probably just scratching the surface of the complexities of this divorce. And we talked about Amazon the last segment, how it can be tricky. He can't just say, well, here's 8% of my stock. Not with this publicly traded company. Now we're going to talk about Blue Origin. And a lot of people don't know about this because they hear about Amazon, but Blue Origin, I don't know the details of his ownership interest, but he helped found this business called Blue Origin, and their mission or their vision is millions of people working and living in space. I think that's right. You can go to blueorigin.com if you want to look it up, but it's really neat. I mean, they had a rocket that sent a pod up into space, and then the rocket base landed itself back down on the ground. It is amazing technology. And So how do you value this? How do you appraise it? Because you know that it's not making any money yet, because I don't think they have launched any satellites. Now, he is competing with SpaceX, like Boeing, Orbital Sciences, Sierra Nevada Corporation. Let's see, what is it? Virgin Galactic. That's
but the bottom
one.
line is, whether it is earning money or not, it is a company that has literally built a spaceship, has put a pod up into the upper atmosphere, has created
safely.
The booster landed safely, and the pod landed safely. So there is value here. But we as attorneys, are we able to value it? Are we able to even pretend like we can come up with a number that would be a fair number in terms of value that can then be used to help determine division of assets? No.
Right.
And that's where the experts come in, and that's why the cost will go up.
But see, this is such a new area. I mean, let me give you an example. So when we have a divorce where there's, let's say, a dental practice or a doctor's practice or a franchise of any type of different franchise, whether it be, Krispy Kreme, they have franchise? I guess they do, or maybe McDonald's. Those have been spot and sold over the years, and the forensic accountants that come in to give a business evaluation, they can literally go to databases to see what these businesses have sold for recently, and then apply those to the data they gather from the particular business, and it influences what these things can be sold for. There's a track record. There really is not much of a track record that I'm aware of when it comes to a civil space race, because that's kind of what we have. Like I was saying, like Virgin Galactic, they're trying to do something very similar. There's Astra Rocket Company. I actually looked it up. There's a bunch of companies that are racing to send people up. I think Virgin was focusing more on the tourism part,
right?
But I think that's a component of Blue Origin. How do you value that? I mean, is there even an expert who can come out and value it? I suppose that if he was not I say he, Jeff, if he wasn't the sole investor in this and he had other investors, like maybe there was an investment group, they may have had their own internal. So this is where discovery might come in, or maybe they requested, hey, when you thought to invest, what did you think this business was going to be ultimately worth? And maybe get some information there. But but if he took marital funds to found it, maybe it was all Mr. Bezos who started this. If it was all his investment, then it's absolutely marital.
Right.
And how do you divide that? Somebody could say, well, maybe she should get 50. Let's say, assume for this hypothetical that he owns 100% of it. And it's a for-profit business, not some nonprofit, because that can change things. We haven't even talked about all the foundations they have. They put $2 billion in a foundation recently. We won't have time for that. But so let's say they put is it fair that she just gets 50% and doesn't work in it and he builds it up over the course of time?
No. I mean, if for her to get 50% and it's valued right now, and then he keeps running and operating the business. And one person could say, no, that's not fair, because he has years left to try and build value and start making money, turn it into actually a profitable company, and the value will skyrocket and she benefited. Mm-hmm. Others will say she's been there from the get-go and it's like stock.
Yeah, weren't they married like 25 years?
Yeah, it's a long-term marriage. So, look, really what it comes down to is, again, deciding what the value is going to be so hard, which is why experts are necessary. And once you do get to a value, division is not easy.
Yeah.
Because that's, again, a company where is he going to want to just give her 50% ownership of that company? Probably not. That's something he wants to control, and it may be his baby. You know what I mean?
Now this one is really interesting because I don't think that's a publicly traded company, so it makes it more complex. Yeah, let's say he's not the sole owner.
That's right.
And there's other owners. They may have section in their operating agreement that prevents him from splitting it because they have. And I don't know if this company's based in California or not, but so I'm thinking Georgia law. With Georgia LLC law, they can put together operating agreements that prevent someone from giving ownership to a third party. The other people can object. So if it's private, she may not be able to get a ownership interest.
That's right.
So Blue Origin has its own complications separate from Amazon.
And when you're talking, the other thing you have to keep in mind is when you are talking about an estate this size, and when you're talking about an estate where a large portion of the value is tied up in companies, then 50-50 may not be what she's going for.
Yes.
I mean, there are plenty of cases where it could be a 70-30, it could be an 80-20 split where he's getting 80%. But again, when you're talking about numbers like this, she would then be getting somewhere between $25 and $30 billion.
Yeah.
So she might be like, yeah, give me my $25 billion and you can keep Amazon and this and that. And more than likely, she'll get some Amazon stock and she'll get some, stock in other companies and other things, and she'll get some real estate. And I think she's going to be fine. I think, yeah.
And that is an excellent point, because if you're getting creative, again, we could bring in another expert. So I don't know if you'd have to get a financial planner on steroids, but they come in and say, you know what? Let's not complicate Amazon. You keep, I don't know what that Amazon stock is, but let's say hypothetically. Let's say that hypothetically the Amazon stock is worth $100 billion. Okay, his Amazon stock. You keep that, but and you keep Blue Origin. Let's say it's valued at $1 billion. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just throwing something out there. You keep the other $36 billion. So you keep all the real estate. We'll just transfer it all to you. You keep the Washington Post, because I think he owns that, and that may be generating revenue. I have no idea.
And she may not want it.
Right. She may not want it.
She might be like, I don't want to run a newspaper.
Maybe they have other businesses, and the person comes in and says, you know what? All these other businesses are generating a lot of revenue for you already. They're generating several million a year. Here's the plan where you can keep this, set these other assets aside, let them grow in value. You live off this $2 or $3 million a year you get from this. And she might be fine with that. So, and maybe he offsets it by paying her $100,000 a month in child support. I don't know. I mean, but here's the good thing. If they were being honest and they're saying, we're going to do this amicably, it leaves room for creativity in dividing the marital estate, or the community property, I should say, because it's in Washington.
Yeah, it's not going to be easy, even if they are working well together.
Right.
Because there's too much information. There are too many question marks. There's too much analysis that needs to happen in order for them to be able to sit at a table and have an educated conversation about what would be a fair and reasonable resolution in this case. And again, maybe that's 50-50. Maybe it's something less. I think it would be probably something less, significantly less. But when you start looking at all the moving pieces and all the different valuations that have to be done, and it's going to be a tremendous amount of work that they can do it, but it's going to cost a lot of money.
And it's going to take time.
That's right.
You wouldn't want to rush through this. Going back to your other point, maybe you don't want to have an arrangement where she takes on certain property and there's tax liabilities they're not aware of and that sort of thing.
And then she has to pay it out of the billions in cash and other cash equivalents that she has.
Tragedy.
How does she do that? By the way, that was sarcasm. Yeah.
Well, this is not sarcasm. We unfortunately are out of time. Gosh, there was actually several more things I wanted to talk about, but there just wasn't enough time. Well, hey, everyone, thanks so much for listening. If you're really enjoying the show, we would love it if you could go out and post a review about us. You could read about how to do that at mtlawoffice.com/review it. Again, thanks so much for listening.
This audio program does not establish an attorney-client relationship with Meriwether and Tharp.